Meta is no longer fact-checking. Bezos is bending the knee. Cook and Altman are giving big dollars to the inauguration. Big tech seems to be going MAGA, or are they just playing nice? What are we to make, by the way, of the Trump foreign policy announcements? Should we spend any time talking about this Greenland nonsense? Finally, we're going to discuss the epidemic of American loneliness and how it's playing out in our politics. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
Well, let's get right to it. Mark Zuckerberg made an announcement yesterday about fact-checking on Meta platforms.
All right, breaking news just moments ago. Facebook announced it is getting rid of fact-checkers and also making major changes to what content is allowed. This is just the latest move as Facebook's parent company Meta and founder Mark Zuckerberg work to very publicly win favor with Donald Trump.
The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes similar to X, starting in the US. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US.
Man, I mean, like, first of all, it's just funny to see a guy read off a teleprompter while wearing a black t-shirt with a chain hanging outside his collar. Like, I mean, it's just like, you know, if he were speaking extemporaneously, it wouldn't strike me as strange, but like reading off a prompter while dressed that way is, I'm not criticizing it. It's just something my eyes have not seen before.
I don't even have strong opinions, honestly, about what the Meta fact checkers have been doing. I do have strong opinions about the overall package that we're getting here because it comes as Meta donated $1 million to the inauguration. They added Dana White, big time Trump supporter, to the board, head of the UFC. They kicked Nick Clegg, who's a former Liberal MP from the UK, to the curb. He was the head of global affairs. He's replaced by Joel Kaplan, who's a former Republican operative. So this is part of a whole series of moves that are meant to curry favor with Trump.
Yeah, well, I agree. I think it's interesting the phrase that Zuckerberg used. He said, restoring free expression, which would imply that free expression previously was not in operation at Meta, right? Like, I mean, you're saying we had taken it away and now we're giving it back, which I just think is an interesting corporate stance. I agree. I mean, certainly the $1 million donation counts as currying favor with Trump. And obviously Trump will like all this stuff. But when I think about the idea of currying favor with Trump versus doing what Republican politicians are doing, which is just pandering to consumers or to voters, that feels more like, and it doesn't make it any better. In fact, maybe it makes it worse. I'm not sure. But to me, it is a reminder that we in American life have a tendency, I think we're starting to get over this, by the way, but we have a tendency to deify founders of major companies or inventors or, people like that. And we tend to think of them as people who created something. And we sometimes we're right when we assume that there's some level of conviction or vision that goes with that founding and that would override capitalist motivations. But most of the time we're confusing the two. Most of the time we think that everybody is Tony Stark, right? But Tony Stark after he's in the cave in Afghanistan. That tends to be who we want to believe these folks are, but they're not. They are people who they have a constituency, and that constituency is shareholders. And I think what's happening here is that Zuckerberg is looking at the result, he says, based on the results of the election. And I think what he's doing is he's chasing where he thinks his consumers want him to go, right?
Yeah, and he talks as if there was this other person out there or other group of people that he's course correcting from.
Right.
He runs the company And the way that the shares work within the company is you can't oust him. He's like a dictator of that company. So these are his policies, and he seems to be talking like this was some kind of, this was a set of policies thrust upon him
by the version of him that wore a tie. It's like there's
Right.
two different dudes. There's like Zuckerberg who wore a tie and had a short haircut, and then there's like Zuckerberg with long curly, perhaps permed, I'm not sure, hair, and a black t-shirt with a chain hanging out. Like the new guy thinks the old guy is a square.
Well, and they had this policy where they weren't allowing civic content, they call it. Now they're going to allow it. And again, I honestly don't even know. I forget what what even the original justification for going one way or the other is. There's certain platforms that allow the civic and election content, some that don't. I've been in the middle of this where trying to get stuff, I get stuff blocked all the time on these platforms, just like normal content for my day job. So it's not even just like it's not the policy itself, it's the inconsistency, and it's what he's trying to do, which is curry favor with the Trump administration. 404 Media also reported yesterday that Meta's human resources team has been deleting criticism of Dana White from their Facebook marketplace or workplace, the internal platform where their employees communicate. And look, I guess you could have a rationale of that, which is when White becomes a board member, there's probably a policy there involved, which is that you don't, there might be some policy against criticizing or disparaging for other employees on the marketplace. So maybe there's an explanation. But here's the trend, though. It goes beyond Mark Zuckerberg. Jeff Bezos dined in Mar-a-Lago with Trump. Amazon is producing a Melania documentary in which Trump is the executive producer. So essentially state-run media.
Maybe she'll let him, move back down the hall now.
Bezos and Amazon also donated $1 million to the inauguration. A cartoonist quit at the Washington Post Friday after they tried to submit a cartoon of Bezos bending the knee, and that was spiked. After Bezos met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, Trump posted on Truth Social, "Everybody wants to be my friend," which accurate. Tim Cook also donated $1 million to the inauguration. Sam Altman says he plans to do the same.
We should be clear with people who don't know. Trump being an executive producer of that documentary, the 99% likelihood is that what that means is Trump or the Trump organization or the Trump campaign or someone in his orbit wrote a check to get the documentary made. So, I mean, they're literally putting a Trump campaign ad on their platform is what that is. All right.
This is a weird trend, by the way, that you and I should probably tackle at some point. I watched this Aaron Rodgers documentary on Netflix, and it's clearly produced by his team. I don't know exactly how it works, but it's everything's from his perspective. He's got RFK Jr. on there just waxing poetically about his views, and he's framed as this guy who's trying to speak truth to power. There's a very disturbing episode 2 in which he goes to Costa Rica and does ayahuasca with a bunch of Buffalo Bills players. It's very concerning. Von Miller and Jordan Poyer. Yeah.
It's a huge within the, as I'm sure you know, it's a huge point of argument within the documentary filmmaking world right now as to the level of involvement that the subject of documentaries are allowed to have. And it's grown largely out of the docu-series world, right? I mean, if you look at stuff there's been some stuff that I've really enjoyed. I can't remember Last Dance is a great example. Mike Tolan, who is a pretty legendary sports producer and documentary producer, put The Last Dance together, but also people have criticized it because Michael Jordan played a role in producing it, may have helped with some of the financing. I'm not sure, because what people say about that is that means, and we're getting off on a tangent, but people say, well, then how honest from a journalistic standpoint is it? And then other people say, hey, documentaries aren't necessarily journalism. So, that aside, I guess what we come back to here is, what are we to do? Literally, is there anything for us to do about these huge entities like Meta, making changes like this that feel like legal changes? They're policies at these huge corporations, and these corporations are so large and have such an enormous impact on our lives that it feels like it would have been a governmental or a legislative decision. So it feels like there should be somebody we should be able to hold accountable. But I'm not sure that there is, other than people trying to, boycott the platforms, which is extremely difficult to organize with something as pervasive as Meta or Amazon.
Yeah, you can't run a business, honestly. Like there are certain businesses you cannot run without an active Meta account and an active Amazon account, and they know this. Now, it's also important to mention that Trump threatened to jail Mark Zuckerberg.
He did. I forgot.
Yeah.
When was that? What did he say? I don't even remember.
I forget. It was
Who
like a year or
knows?
two ago.
I'll just take your word for it, because
yeah, it is. So this is the context. So you may think, Jason, that there's some day down the line where you make $1 billion and you have FU money, but and I'm not the first person to say this, but what's the point of having FU money if you never say FU?
Mm-hmm.
There are certain people who did. Reid Hoffman, Reed Hastings. These are some of the people who, and Hoffman says he's fleeing the country. That's kind of where he is. Well, kudos to Mark Cuban, who I think is fairly courageous on this front. I haven't checked to see what he's done since the election.
Yeah.
But
no, I think he's continued to be pretty critical.
And it's not just because they share my politics. To be clear, the right was up in arms whenever they felt like these companies were pro-Democrat and all that. And honestly, there were points at which I think they were onto something. Like there were points at which these companies, I think, were biased in favor of Democrats. None of that, like there's no version of the past 8, 10, 20 years that is anywhere in the vicinity of the bending in the knee that we're seeing right now. And you're not hearing from these people because it's not about consistency. It's not about the value. It's about power. So now that they have these tech companies bending the knee, they have them bending to the knee to them. It's not about the principle. It's not about these companies being neutral. It's not about free speech. It's about power.
It's no different than campaign reform. I mean, the campaign reform has been something that typically, Democrats have been in favor of. But if you look back, like at the state level, what tends to happen is, the party out of power tends to argue for some type of reform until that party takes power and gets the levers of power, and then they tend to be against reform. And this is just the means of communicating a message, which makes it no different and pretty directly analogous to what was, campaign reform debates in the early 2000s and late 90s. So yeah, I guess for me, the important thing to take from this is that we're going to have to filter this information, like for ourselves. We're going to have to work even harder with the people in our life to remind them that there's going to be additional misinformation on these platforms. Continually just getting mad about it is not going to help, except it is important to make sure everybody knows that there is probably biased information coming so that more people will put it through their own filter. Other than that, I think it just comes down to we have to win elections, because it seems that these platforms tend to be fair weather fans, so to speak.
Yeah, I also think the other part of this is the politics, which is, Republicans were so successful at painting Democrats as the elite, the out of touch, the people who are part of the mainstream, control the levers of power that are, censoring them on the internet and all that. And I think that Democrats now need to turn around and make it clear to the electorate who holds the power. And it's not a hard argument to make in this context. It is this is an extreme version of, this, oligopoly, kleptocracy, whatever you want to call it. And, for context to the audience, like, it's not the first time that companies gave to inauguration. So to be clear, Biden's inaugural committee raised $62 million, which included Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Pfizer, Bank of America. Amazon donated not $1 million then, but $267,000. Google gave $337,000. So we have to be consistent here. The amounts are different, but they did give to Biden.
The amounts are different, but don't you imagine that inauguration, because it was during COVID and it was very limited, was probably a lot less expensive? There were a lot fewer people coming. There were very few parties, if any. Totally. I don't think were there any parties. I don't think they could have any. I mean, so
yeah, it's not that they gave to Trump's inauguration.
Right.
It's the combination of everything there, right?
Yeah.
The spiking, the cartoons, adding Dana White to your board, changing the content moderation policy. It's all the timing, right? It's all coming together at the same time.
Okay, so here's what I take from this, which is that where we need to be in terms as Democrats right now, because this is not 2017. It's not like resistance. Like, I mean, you can feel it. That's not where people are. They're not like we there are things we have to resist. We have to resist Pete Hegseth. We have to resist these people getting confirmed. There's all sorts of things like that. But also for those of us who are not in Congress, we also have to be very focused, as do people in Congress, on the next election. And that means creating the narrative, which happens to be quite true as well, that we are the underdogs, that they are the establishment. It needs to be really put out there with a large microphone that they don't just have the Supreme Court and both houses of Congress and the White House. They also have Facebook and Instagram, and they have Twitter, and they have, so because for years and years and years they have gotten a lot of mileage, the other side, off of the idea that we somehow own the media, so to speak. What the media has changed, and they control it. And we need to make sure people know that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Trump's big foreign policy announcements and some disturbing trends at the ground level of American society.
Starchy, stiff workwear is not optimal when you need to endure your busiest, most important days. With Rhone's Commuter Collection, your clothing looks professional and performs like activewear and feels like total comfort. Rhone has premium pieces to elevate every occasion, and we're talking about the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, quarter zips, polos, blazers, all boosted with functional performance properties. Rhone's signature technical fabrics stretch in every direction, breathe, fight odor and the elements, and effortlessly work everywhere so you can stay calm and collected even when life takes unexpected turns. Treated with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, for more wears between washes, you'll be fresh and clean all day long. Rhone's Commuter Collection is incredibly versatile, allowing me to dress up for big meetings while also staying comfortable. Often I wear the same thing when I'm doing my meetings throughout the day than when I go to the gym. And the collection has a lot of options to choose from so that you'll be able to secure the best outfit for your specific needs. The Commuter Collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. Head to rhone.com/majority and use promo code majority to save 20% off the entire order. That's 20% off the entire order when you go to rhone.com/majority and use the code majority. It's time to embody your most confident self. When your car breaks down, you take it to a mechanic with no hesitation. You need it, and it's not something that you could fix yourself. And men should think the exact same way about ED. But the reality is that you might be hesitant to seek help. Thankfully, through HIMS, you can get access to personalized ED treatment without stepping outside your door. HIMS is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatment from the comfort of your couch. And HIMS provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis, and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for the uncomfortable doctor's visits. Just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free. And no insurance is needed. One low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. And with hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, HIMS can help you find the ED option that works for you. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/majority. That's HIMS.com/majority for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/majority. The products mentioned are chewable, compounded products which are not provided or not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
All right,
Well,
Robbie, what else is going on?
Well, we got this Trump foreign policy press conference, and it's always hard to say what to pay attention to. You know, after the election, we talked about how we don't want to swing at every pitch. So I was hesitant to even bring this up, but it seems important enough.
I think we should
Talk
talk about
about-
it so that we can talk about whether to talk about it for every pitch. I know you have to mess with your mic for a second, so you want me to introduce this real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, all right. So Ravi's on the road, so he's doing a little troubleshooting with his mic. Okay, so in a press conference on Tuesday, Trump outlined a second-term foreign policy agenda, and it rests on global alliances and free trade, but on economic coercion and unilateral military might, even against allies. All right, well, that's at least how he's talking, right? He's talking like someone who's saying, hey, we're going to use the military for economic purposes. Whether I really do that's a different question, but clearly that's what he wants us talking about. So specifically with the Panama Canal and Greenland, he suggested that he could use force to take them over. Look, who's even really ever thought about Greenland other than when you were trying to figure out if it was really that big when you were looking at a globe or if you played Risk, but whatever. With Canada, he suggested that he would hit the U.S.'s northern neighbor with extreme tariffs, leaving it no choice but to submit to annexation. He said Canada and the United States, that really would be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. So for Trump, this case for this sweeping reorientation of foreign policy, which seems like a pretty churched up way to say Trump came up with some harebrained ideas and set them into a microphone. But let's go with this, that it's this long espoused and conflicting set of convictions that he has, that even close allies are treating the U.S. unfairly, and that America gave away the canal to Panama for nothing, that China's moving into what should be the U.S. dominated Western Hemisphere. And then a reporter asked him if he would commit to not using military force or economic pressure trying to acquire these territories. He said, no, I can't assure you on either of those two, but I can say this: we need them for economic security. So he went further and he talked about these other ideas, like renaming the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America, demanding members of NATO spend 5% of gross domestic product on defense, which, by the way, the U.S. doesn't even meet that level. But his comments about Greenland, Canada, and Panama were the most provocative. They drew the most attention. All right, so we'll go more into this in a second. There's more details to it, but first, like, what I think we need to remember is here's the other stuff that's going on in the news that's not being talked about right now as this stuff's being talked about. Pete Hegseth, who a few weeks ago, like before the holidays, was a very troubled nominee, seems to no longer be a troubled nominee. Kash Patel seems to no longer be a troubled nominee. Haven't heard much about Tulsi Gabbard, since then. But we have heard a lot about Greenland and whether or not Canada and America are going to become the same country. Methinks that is somewhat by design.
Well, I think Trump is feeling himself right now. That's what's going on here. And I think he's like, oh, I'm the big bad guy who's like, who's going to push everybody around. I'm the alpha on the block, right? And when I step in, people are going to be so afraid of me because I'm saying these things that I'm going to be able to negotiate favorable terms on everything that I want. And I think this is a really important fork in the road. Because do I think he's actually going to invade Canada? I mean, nothing would shock me, but I don't think that's in the cards. But what he is doing is playing the crazy person. He's like, okay, I'm going to come in now. They're going to be forced to deal with me and I think this was true of a lot of his rhetoric on tariffs. Now, this is important because one of two things is going to be true. Either this will work and it's going to be hard to argue otherwise when his people are like, yeah, this is what we needed. We needed the alpha on the block to push people around. Or, and I think a very likely scenario, and these are both, both fairly likely scenarios. People call his bluff and then he looks incredibly weak because then he's like, the people are just like, it's the equivalent of domestic US politics where people don't take him seriously. They're like, yeah, this guy's not going to do it. And whatever he says, we're just going to ignore it, which is not a great thing for the U.S. to have a president who people just laugh at and don't take seriously. So, but I do think and I think we've learned our lesson here, hopefully, which is not to assume that the caricature of Trump wins out. Like, this could work in his favor if this is a more disciplined version of his administration than the last one was.
I think you are giving him an awful lot of credit. I think that what Donald Trump, one of his greatest political gifts is is figuring out things that accomplish two goals. One, sound vaguely interesting or intriguing to people who are who don't pay that much attention. Stuff that breaks through, stuff that is so different that it breaks through. For instance, one of the guys I grew up with, one of my guys I refer to as my brothers, who, he pays some attention to politics. I think he listens to this show. His name is Doug. He texted the text thread with me and my brothers the other day about this very thing. And my response in the text thread was that Trump's gift is coming up with stuff that will break through because it sounds kind of interesting, like the Gulf of America. Well, if you come to this, with sort of an open mind and you don't pay a lot of attention to stuff, you go, it's not really in Mexico. It's closer to America. Why should that be called the Gulf of Mexico? We should call that the Gulf of America. Now, if you go further down that road, you're like, what the hell difference does it make? It doesn't make any difference what we call it. But if you just bring it up, you're like, it's the kind of thing you could talk about sitting around at a bar with your buddies, right? Which is what he specializes in. Now, the second part of this that he specializes in is getting liberal podcast hosts and liberal pontificators on MSNBC and CNN to go apoplectic about this and talk about all the reasons that it's stupid and absurd and why we can't have the Panama Canal, we can't have Greenland. And what we end up coming across as is out of touch. Now, we're usually right. It is unworkable. It is absurd. It is a distraction. There are all sorts of reasons why blustering about invading Canada is really bad. But when we talk about that while opposing a thing that doesn't sound that serious, we seem overly serious and we seem out of touch, which is why my suggestion is not that we shouldn't be against this stupid stuff. My suggestion is that we should be very careful about when it is that, we are falling for the Roadrunner's traps.
Yeah. Well, I think one area where it's really interesting to use the lens you just talked about, which is, you're not to clutch pearls and get offended, but to really think about, all right, what is the effect of something like this, is when Trump said yesterday that all hell will break out in the Middle East if the hostages are not held by Hamas are not released by Inauguration Day. Right. Now, this is the kind of stuff that does matter. And this is why it matters. We talked about Jimmy Carter and what happened to Jimmy Carter. They didn't release the hostages in Iran until Reagan took power, I think. And that actually was a big part of how people viewed Reagan as a strong president. And there was all sorts of shenanigans going on behind the scenes about that.
And it should be pointed out that Carter still showed up to welcome them home because that's what was more important to him than getting credit for it.
Right. A similar thing happened with Vietnam, with LBJ, with Kissinger, who there's credible historic evidence that he kept that conflict going longer so that Nixon, whatever.
You mean the evidence that that Nixon actually that Nixon was working behind the scenes to derail the peace talks?
Yes. And so here's what I think could happen here is there's just a lot, like, regardless of what Trump says, there's just a lot of reasons to think that hostages are going to be released, right? Like, regardless of what he says. And if they are released at any point in the next few weeks or months, he's going to take credit for that. And the American people are going to give him credit for it, whether he had anything to do with it or not. And so I think this is actually like costless in many ways. The only thing it's going to cost him is the foolish pro-Palestinian people who either voted for him or didn't vote at all, which, congratulations to you. If you're listening, this is what you got. Like, you have to really work hard to find anything that isn't to the right of Joe Biden on Middle East policy that we're already seeing and certainly are going to see from here on out. I think this is, we didn't need a reminder. The guy who moved the embassy to Jerusalem, this is what you're going to get. And this one I think is relatively costless. Like, he'll get credit for anything that happens. And if no hostages are released, I don't think people are really going to take notice.
Well, It's costless, except if hostages are not released, because what he is very clearly saying here is that to whatever extent, which there has been to a great extent, although a lot of people don't believe it, that Joe Biden has been trying to rein in the instincts of Netanyahu and trying to keep the war from broadening, that Trump is quite clearly saying that he will do none of that. And frankly, I think that that's the case whether hostages are released or not.
Yeah. Yeah, here's the question, right? Like that guy Scott Adams, who my dad is obsessed with, the cartoonist,
Yeah.
he always says like Trump just needs to be directionally correct. And he used to talk about this when it comes to the border wall, right? And I used to think this was crazy, but I do think that over time, in some ways, they've been proven correct in terms of the way the electorate treats him. So like he has to be in the vicinity of some effectiveness on some of this extreme rhetoric for him to win this sort of narrative. But if he just keeps saying things and the exact opposite happens and people ignore him, that's where things get costly for him. People just say this guy, and if you combine that with some very likely age degeneration that's going to come of him, he'll be the crazy uncle who just says crazy things and nobody listens to him. And that's a dangerous place to be. But again, we have not gotten very far by underestimating him. I do think that this is, whether strategic or not, is something that his people are well placed. There are more strategic people who weaponize his comments, right? So, you think, for instance, with the American Jewish community, for example, like if hostages are released, they're going to say, see, this is what we needed, right? Like this is the kind of stuff that, whether Trump himself is being strategic or not, the entire apparatus that we just talked about is very good at creating a narrative around him that he is the alpha that we needed, the guy who's, restoring American strength, yada, yada, yada. And that we need to take seriously.
So when your friends, for those listening, when your friends talk about Greenland or the Gulf of America or whatever, it's important to remember that of all the reasons that we were not victorious in the last election, the one that pretty much everybody on our side can agree on, or the one that that seems to be the most likely theory, and there are many theories and probably many things that are true at once. One thing that's for sure is that Americans were not satisfied with the level of economic recovery, that they were still paying too much for eggs and things like that, and that ultimately, whether it was a sophisticated decision or not, I would argue it was not, they decided to change horses in order to try and do something about that. And if that's the case, that means that that's probably going to be the measuring stick for the midterm elections too. So what that means is that when somebody brings up Greenland or the Gulf of America or any of this other stuff, maybe not the Middle East, because I think you can have a substantive discussion about that, but all of these distraction things that merging with Canada, the answer to that is, I'd like to know what that's going to do to bring down the cost of groceries right now, because this guy got elected promising he was going to work on that right now. And right now he's talking about buying Greenland or merging with Canada, which, even if it were possible, would take many, many years, I would assume, to achieve, or at least to integrate those things into our economy in a way that would make a difference, even if it would make a positive difference. So what does that have to do with delivering on the promises that he was elected based on? Like, focus on holding him accountable for the economic promises.
Yeah, I agree. I think whatever tolerance people have for Trump's eccentricities, they will not tolerate it when it comes to a tanking economy. And I do think that there's a wag the dog distraction instinct that he has, that if the economy is doing really poorly, this erratic behavior is only going to tick up. And that's where I think it'll be bad for our country and it'll be bad for his presidency, because I think that will be a much harder sell for the American public. All this stuff is cute when the economy is growing. When it's not, people are going to be really annoyed about it.
One thing that we are going to spend a lot of time talking about over the next 4 years is what are Trump's actual motivations now. For all the jokes that people make or the concerns, the great likelihood is he will not be trying to run again for president, right? He's not going to. The Constitution's pretty clear on this. And even if he wanted to, like, there's not enough people who want that. All right. So he's a lame duck president. Now, last time his motivation was he wanted to be elected again, right? And then in this last campaign, his primary motivation, I do still believe, was to stay out of prison, and he seems to have achieved that. So, what is his motivation for the next 4 years? Is it in the next 2 years? Is it to try and keep a Republican Congress? I mean, it should be, but that's not necessarily always the case with Trump. So we just have to think about that. And I think a lot of the time it comes down to things like his son, who runs his company, is in Greenland trying to find economic opportunity. And I'm guessing not just for the United States of America, right? He's trying to open a new market for Trump, is my thinking here.
Yeah, you try to get in Trump's head. I think there are two things that are going to matter to him more than anything else, and I'll add a third. But the one is he wants to be the new Reagan. He wants his name on everything. He wants Republicans talking about him forever and naming airports and bridges and talking about how he's transformed the country. And honestly, to the audience, like, you got to get ready for that. I mean, that's just a thing. Like, no matter how ineffective he's going to be in this term, like, that whole wing of the party is totally captured by him, and they'll do that whole project with him. And that's just a thing that we're going to have to deal with. So he'll be successful in that, even if he's a crappy second-term president. The other thing is to leave office with a shitload of money, which also is not very hard, given their propensity to step over every ethical line. There's already happening. Who the hell knows what kind of foreign deals are already going on right now with him ascending into the presidency. I would say the third is his quest for vengeance, going after his enemies. So those are the three priorities as I see it. And I think he'll achieve all three of those things. I think
what you just said is exactly right. I think people should say that to the people in their lives, and then they should remind them what's not on that list is any of us. What's not on that list is delivering on any of the promises he made. And
I guess if you use us in the wider sense of the Midas Network, I think they're on list number 3.
But the even wider us. American people. But and then I think making sure that the Republicans writ large are held accountable for that, because what you can't end up with is a situation where people do sour on Trump, but only on Trump. They need to sour on Republicans generally. It's got to stick to them.
Totally. Well, okay, let's talk about this piece in the Atlantic. We promised that we would take a step back pretty regularly to talk about deeper trends more than just what's going on in the news cycle. And there's this piece in the Atlantic, a long and very interesting piece by Derek Thompson called The Antisocial Century. The subtitle is Americans are now spending more time alone than ever. It's changing our personalities, our politics, and even our relationship to reality. And this piece is chock full of data about how over the past 50 years, there has been a steady decline in Americans spending time with each other. And this has to do with, people going out to dinner with each other, sitting next to somebody at dinner, going to the parks, playing sports, playing board games, inviting each other over. And what's interesting is it's not just a loneliness problem. So he talks about loneliness and isolation as two different things. It's not that necessarily that people are lonelier, because that would belie a feeling of wanting to solve this. Is saying it's actually strangely, people are just more comfortable at home than ever before. And people are more isolated today than they even were at the height of the pandemic. So this is a trend that began before the pandemic and is actually continuing after the pandemic. And that there are real implications, Jason, for our politics here.
Yeah. And also it's just practical, right? I mean, when I think back to during COVID, when it felt like at the very beginning, when it felt like it was dangerous to go out, because it was, I can remember there'd be times where, I would be feeling very isolated, and I wasn't sure why something was bothering me that day, and then I would, mask up, and I would get, all my hand sanitizer, and I'd go to the grocery store, and I'd literally have a 30-second conversation, meaningless, with a cashier. And I would walk out and just feel so invigorated. And it was like this occasional reminder that we are pack animals. Humans need social interaction. And there was this promise of the internet that it would drive greater social interconnection. And in a lot of ways it has, but it's like through it's like watching a play through a straw. You know what I mean? It's not the same as being in the same room. And I think that this article makes a lot of great points, both about how it is harmful to us individually and culturally, but also the ways in which it does actually add some value, right? I mean, like, for instance, obviously there's the convenience of it all, but I think about how, like, I grew up in this neighborhood where, I'm so grateful for the neighborhood I grew up in. I grew up, and this is true for like a lot of kids of our generation. Like, I grew up in a neighborhood where it was, you came home from school and you finished your homework and then you just went outside the house and you
Yeah.
went to your friend's house and it was before cell phones or anything. So my parents, when they wanted us back, would either step out on the front porch and yell your name, or they would, call the 4 or 5 houses that they knew that I was probably at and then they found it. And my friend's parents would come out and say, "Hey, your dinner's ready. You got to go home." And I'm like so grateful to have grown up in a neighborhood like that. And then I look at my son, who has this awesome group of friends, right? And I'm very happy that he has friends in different areas, right? Like, he has some very tight friends from school who, like, the interests they do together are like skateboarding and like video games. And then he has like his baseball friends, who, like, is basically like a street gang over the summer because they're a very competitive club team, and even over the winter, like, they have 3 practices a week inside, and it's these pretty distinct, with a little bit of crossover, groups of friends. But when my son comes home from school, if he doesn't have practice, he's got a couple of little friends in this neighborhood, but like, they don't go to his school. And he'll play with them a little bit, but like in the winter, for instance, like, he's coming home and he's inside. And so my instinct is, he gets on, he's on a screen, and he's got his iPad there, and he's on a Zoom call with his buddies, and they're playing a video game together. And my instinct has always been like, "Hey man, too much screen, stop the screens, go." But then I have to remember, like, oh, this is his going out into the neighborhood and playing, and it's not as good, but he is being social, and he does need that. And so, I'm just saying, like, it's very hard to figure out as a parent, but also as a citizen, which parts of this are good and which parts of this are really harmful.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people are trading this book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, which I think goes deep into this phenomenon of screens. But what I think Thompson does a really good job of is he talks about how this is about more than just the cell phone screen. Our houses are nicer than they've ever been before. Like, houses, somebody was telling me this the other day, and it made a lot of sense. It was like, the houses in the 80s were just not, and the 90s were just not good places to be. Like, at least my house, I love, my mom's listening, but like it's not anything to her. It's just like, houses were kind of ugly and small, and like there wasn't a lot on TV. It was just like, the same BS.
Well,
and the video games weren't that good.
There's still lots of houses that are small, but the difference is that the smallest house in this country right now, on average, certainly not for the lowest income level, but on average, statistically, probably has Netflix.
Yeah,
right?
Netflix, some form of video games, cell phones, and this is just a lot. And I think what Thompson asks is, we're gaining a lot through this technology, but we don't talk enough about what we're losing. And I think that's a really important question. And it has implications for our politics. And people can read all the data about how it's pulling everybody away from each other. I don't think that you need convincing of that. But I think the big question is, well, what does it do for our politics? He talks about how you have all these isolated people. He certainly talks about the isolation of men and this sort of stoicism that is being preached on the internet of men, where they're, he kind of makes fun of like the internet phenomenon, the YouTube video of like the morning routine and all this kind of, but what's missing from the morning routine is anybody else in your life.
Right.
But he says that what it does is it breeds the sense of isolation. And that isolation means that you are so much less likely, obviously, to bump into people who are different and exchange ideas and see the humanity in other people, but also you become much less interested in solutions to make society better, and you become way more susceptible to burn the system down rhetoric, because you're not invested in the system. You know, you're not invested in any civic institutions, and I think that's really important.
There's a great passage at the end of this piece that I went ahead and grabbed and threw into our outline, which says, "Families teach us love, and tribes teach us loyalty." I'm going to read that first sentence again. Families teach us love, and tribes teach us loyalty. He says, "The village teaches us tolerance. Imagine that a local parent disagrees with you about affirmative action at a PTA meeting. Online, you might write him off as a political opponent who deserves your scorn. But in a school gym full of neighbors, you bite your tongue. As the year rolls on, you discover that your daughters are in the same dance class. And at pickup, you swap stories about caring for aging relatives. Although your differences don't disappear, they're folded into a peaceful coexistence. And then the two of you sign up for a committee to draft a diversity statement for the school. You find that you can accommodate each other's opposing views." And then he has a quote here. It's politically moderating to meet thoughtful people in the real world who disagree with you. And then end quote, he says, "But if PTA meetings are still frequently held in person, many other opportunities to meet and understand one's neighbors are becoming a thing of the past." Which, I mean, it's so true. Like, I mean, I've been in public life long enough to observe the massive Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America size difference between the way people speak to you online versus the way they speak to you in person. And something happens when you become a human being contextualized in front of them. And there's no question that that is seriously damaging our politics.
Yeah, well, for folks, check out the article. It's really, really excellent. It's long, but the Atlantic actually does it in audio format too, so you can listen to it as well. There's a lot in there. Well, one for us, Jason.
Yeah, I'll go. You're still in Costa Rica, yeah?
Yeah, here till the end of the month, I think.
Yes. Well, we've had ourselves quite a blizzard here in Kansas City, and it has been an interesting few days. Diana is supposed to get home tonight. She had speeches in Austin and in Dallas the last few days. She was originally going to come home for a day on Sunday night, but then this massive snowstorm hit. It's been like 0 degrees here. We had like 20 some inches of snow. So we've been totally snowed in. As you can see, for those watching, I have not shaved in a few days. It's just been me and the kids here. And then Diana got food poisoning last night, soldiered through her speech this morning, and is working her way home. So it's been quite an adventure. Actually, our babysitter was able to, the roads were good enough. She's with the kids right now, and she's fantastic. And she came yesterday after having not been able to come over for a few days. And I joked when she got here that it felt like the kids and I had been signaling every airplane that was flying over our life raft, and someone sent help. And look, I'm sure a lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm so sorry you had to be," because I hear this all the time when I joke about it. People are like, "Oh, a dad had to take care of his own children for a few days." That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when you are blessed enough to have a partner and be fortunate enough to be used to man-to-man defense, 2-on-2, when you go to 1-on-2, you go to zone, it's just harder. And it's not my strong suit. But that said, it has been kind of great being stuck in the house with the kids in a way. We've had some fun over the last few days too.
Well, that reminds me, by the way, for everybody out in California, stay safe out there. I know some friends who are evacuating.
Me too.
It seems really horrible. Yeah, it seems like every year now we're having these crazy.
There's like a fire season now.
Yeah,
which is I do not understand, and I'm sure I could, but it is, somebody was talking about, I can't remember who it was. Was it Dave Chappelle who was talking about the difficulty of being a young person now versus, because now you know everything. There used to be just bad things happening, but you didn't know about it. And now you know about all of it, and it's overwhelming. Anyway, things are probably pretty good in Costa Rica.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Two quick things. One is, I went on Goodreads because I'm gearing up for this book, this novel that I'm releasing in March. So I'm starting to put up all the different books I'm reading. And so you can go to Ravi M. Gupta on Goodreads if you're a Goodreads person and follow me. I'm starting to build my from a very small base of followers. I just put that account up. So follow me there. Relatedly, if you're somebody who's, reviews a lot of books on Goodreads, have a lot of followers, or you're a book influencer of some kind, or you got a bookstore or whatever, and you want to be a part of like a launch team for this book, shoot me a note. So you could either DM me on Instagram at Ravi M. Gupta, or you go to ravimgupta.com and there's a little contact form there. You can just send me a message. I'd love to have your help, get you a copy of the book. We can review it. I'm getting to that point now where we're a couple months out from that launch. So that'll be exciting. But what were you going to say?
Before you go on, tell people more, because, we've only mentioned that you have a novel coming out like 1 or 2 times and people don't really know what it's about. And it's really good.
I want to save that.
Yeah,
let me save that for when we get closer, because I want to push people to actually purchase it who are not in the group I just described. So,
okay.
So I'll save that part for now.
All right, but if people want to find all that out before other people and they want to get the opportunity to do things, they should send you a note.
Yeah. They're definitely, like, if you're one of those people who kind of promote it, I can definitely get you a copy of it. The other thing is, I know I've been like sharing my journey with psychedelics on this podcast with people before. And I know my mom listens to this, so she's not going to love this story, but, every year in Costa Rica, I think for the past few years, I think the first time I talked about it a couple of years ago on this podcast, I do like a major dose of shrooms, like psilocybin, and it's always been like a little challenging experiences here and there, but largely positive experience. This time I did what they call a hero dose the other day, and it was crazy. So I did like the ego dissolving amount, and I did it in like a guided session, and got to the point where I couldn't tell where my eyes were open or not. I couldn't hear anything. And this was going on for 2 hours.
This is so terrifying to me.
It was like being pulled underwater for 2 hours, where my friend Katie, who's the guide who does it, says there's like level 1, which is you look at your hand and it looks a little different. Then there is no hand. And then there's the third level, which is there is no you. I was the third level. And I was that way for 2 hours. And I share this to say, like, I've espoused like some of the benefits of this stuff over the years, and I still believe it. And there are different dosages of it, and I know a lot of people who've done a lot in that realm. And there's all kinds of studies about PTSD and end of life palliative care and addiction and trauma and all that are being done by places like NYU, Johns Hopkins, and in England as well. I believe in all that stuff. But you got to be prepared for these types of moments, because that was the scariest 2 hours of my life. And
it sounds terrifying. Would you ever do that again?
I was talking. The next day I was like, definitely not. And now I thought about it. I'm like, I want to get back on the horse and do it again. And I actually think I handled it quite well. I was just like, at a certain point, I was like, whatever was me, which was it's a complicated question, what was left at that point. I knew theoretically that the world would reassert itself. And I said to myself, I'm going to be so grateful just to be able to see and like experience reality again. And it was like almost like a painting that was like the brush strokes were little by little over the course of the second hour were starting to come back. And there was this point where the two funny things. One was, this is not going to be a surprise, but one of the first things that I situated myself, because I couldn't even fathom where I was or what day or time it was or anything like that at a certain point. The one thing I could assert to be true was that the Bills had not played in the playoffs yet. So that's how I started to realize it was Monday. I was like, okay, it's Monday because the Bills haven't played. That was the first thing. The second thing was I was on this, like, I finally at a certain point had enough to stand up. And I'm standing up on this balcony in like this, in this valley. And at this point, I'm so grateful that I could see, but it's like, I don't really see that much. I mean, we're talking about like cosmic level hallucinations. Yeah. But when I move my hand out in front of me, it's like extreme trails in slow motion. But I felt like Michael Jordan, because the difference between that and like not having any sense of where I was like, that was that was like, to me, like I was like Steph Curry level hand-eye coordination, even though it was like nothing made any sense. But yeah, that was definitely a memorable experience. And it was definitely a lot less fun than the time I think I shared the last time here. So I feel like I owe it to the audience to keep them updated on this journey that I'm on.
Meanwhile,
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I really want to get some good sleep tonight. So I think I'll take a 5, because the most I've ever taken is a 5 milligram marijuana gummy. And I'm like the guy who like, I take it really close to bed because I don't like to feel even a little high. Like I'm the total other end of the spectrum where I'm like, I would say I admire your courage to be willing to surrender control like that, because that is not in my current programming.
Well, the craziest thing was at that time when I was standing, the woman who's the guide was handing me water, and it was like an army of hers giving me this water from all sides. It was just like, it's like the craziest thing. And what's wild is that's not the scary part. At that point, I'm
Right.
happy
Yeah, you're
that
like,
there's
oh,
even,
I'm
I'm
on my
even
way back.
seeing anything. Like the fact that he was even seeing a person and that there was people and that there was a me was like the ultimate success of that few hours. So yeah, I think I'll get back on the horse next year with that level, but I need a full year. I think between that experiences, it's going to take me all year to even figure out what that was.
Why say I got to do that again if like you didn't enjoy it?
Well, it's like it's like the people who like explore the Amazon or like the Arctic back in the day. It's like there's something about the adventure that I think is
it's
really
there.
thrilling.
We go to the moon because it's there.
Yeah, and it's also your brain. So there's a whole lot of personal stuff that was involved in that. Like there was the first hour or two before I went to the full ego dissolution, I was in the back seat of the car when I was a kid. Like we did a lot of driving around, and I was starting like I kind of like, it's weird because you can really situate yourself in certain times and places. And I was like, we used to drive around a lot. My dad used to drag us to different cities when my parents were still together, or my mom would be chasing into one city or another. And I was like doing really meaningful work that would be more resembling therapy at that point. And I was like in the car, I'm like, what am I doing? And I'm like, that was really useful.
Were you a little kid again?
Yeah. And it's
That's
like, and then you're kind of like remembering things. What was my mom like? What was my brother like? And all this kind of stuff. And that stuff is important. And that resembled how a lot of the other experiences I had were. And then I closed and I'm having a conversation with the guide. And then closing your eyes is like a massively important act when you do this stuff. Cause it's like, it's almost like when they tell you not to close your eyes when you're like you're dying or something. It's like, cause it really puts you like, I closed my eyes and I didn't wake up. I didn't open them for 2 hours. Or at least I might've opened them during those 2 hours, but I couldn't see for 2 hours. And then that went from a place that was like, and I'm sitting at a table, like doing this, and I really woke up 2 hours later at that table, and it was like I went from this period of being in the back of the car to fighting the ego dissolution. Like basically what she was saying was I wasn't letting it dissolve. Like basically I was like, I don't want to let go of my sentience. And that is like, it's almost like a violent act. Like it was almost like, and it was like almost felt that way for the beginning, where it's like almost like it's like almost like a ton of like an atomic bomb level energy, and at a certain point you just got to let go. That was like the first hour, So yeah, needless to say, an interesting experience. But yeah, it's like I'll probably do it again, and I just like I just want to try to explore it more. Like this time it was scary, but next time I know like what it's like to come out of it. So you're like, okay, what is it like to not, like maybe that's like what I would love to do.
Yeah, it's like maybe less scary when you know what's going to happen. Well, yeah. I will continue to look forward to hearing about it from you, because that is probably not my cup of tea.
Hopefully my mom skips this episode.
I don't think she's gonna. All right. Well, this was fun. Thanks, everybody. Please leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Meidas Mighty. You can find me on social media at Jason Kander, including now on Blue Sky. And you can find Ravi on everything at Ravi M. Gupta. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.